Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I'm Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of Hell's Heart by Alexis Hall. This is a sci-fi book. It came out from Tor in March of 2026. I read this for the Interstellar Book Club for May, and I listened to it on Audible. To start, I have never read an Alexis Hall book, and I was surprised when I scrolled through their other stuff to see that it seems to be mainly romances. So kudos to them for branching out into this sort of lit-ficky sci-fi. Truth be told, I thought this adaptation of Moby-Dick was exceptional. So I read Moby-Dick, yes, I've read this book, for an American literature class in university. I'm pretty sure I wrote the date in here of when that was, fall of 2006. I used to write in my books like when I read the books or when I got them. So I was like, oh, I'm really glad I did that, because I was like, okay, yeah, I was right. I did read this 20 years ago. And despite being a staunch environmentalist, as I've mentioned on my channel before, I actually really enjoyed this book. Of course I did, given how much I love books about water and boats and the sea. And anyway, this book is fascinating. Of course, there's a lot of kind of long stretches talking about whaling, but I mean, you can just skip those, really. Okay, so what is it about? Hell's Heart, not Moby-Dick. You all know what Moby-Dick is about. So Earth is a ruin, and the scattered remnants of humanity scavenge what they can from the stars under the watchful auspices of the grab bag of collectives, corporations, and churches, which are all that remains of what we once called society. Having long exhausted any conventional sources of energy, life in the solar system is now sustained by the volatile hallucinogenic substance called spermaceti, which is harvested from the brains of vast leviathans that swim the atmospheric currents of Jupiter. Finding herself with no money and little to occupy her groundside, the narrator I takes a commission aboard the hunter bark the Pequod as it sets out in pursuit of precious spermaceti. Once aboard, however, she finds herself pulled inexorably into the orbit of the bark's captain, a charismatic but fanatically driven woman who the narrator names only as A. As the Pequod plunges ever deeper into the turbulent, monster-hunted atmosphere of the gas giant, the narrator begins to lose herself in the eerie world of the divine hunting and the captain's increasingly insistent delusions. The only thing that must keep her grounded is the bond she develops with Q, a woman from the wreck of old Earth whose skin is marked with hallucinogenic light and who remembers things otherwise lost. So this is a faithful Moby-Dick adaptation. By faithful, I mean it follows the main story beats pretty closely and focuses a lot on the same themes: self-destruction, survivor's guilt, religion, and whaling. If you haven't read Moby-Dick, I'm going to be that person and say that a lot of this book will probably go over your head. The most enjoyable aspects of the book for me was spotting the connections between the source material and the new version. Like how the overly queer relationship between I and Q in Hell's Heart mirrors the homoerotic undertones of Queequeg and Ishmael in Moby-Dick, and how I's sexual variation of A mirrors Ishmael's devotion to Ahab. There's also later aspects in the plot, as well as the climax, which suggests, like Moby-Dick does, the entire venture of the captains is based on a sort of psychotic narcissism fueled by greed. That's essentially what revenge is sometimes, especially against an animal. Like revenge against someone that I don't know, like harms your children or hurts you, against a person. That makes more sense to me. I've never understood revenge against an animal, but I guess that's kind of the point of the book. The captain, though, is both a badass and horrible, a force of nature that is hard to look away from. It also shows how having a boatload of charisma can be very convincing. It's a story about obsession, and not just the captains for the white whale. It's an obsession for a lot of people about money, about finding a purpose, about a lot of things. This book, also like in Moby-Dick, provides a lot of details into the minutiae of whaling, how this ties into the economy of the universe, and how people's religions tie into this. So the long passages explaining the technicalities of whaling seem like an homage to the source material, but myself, who loves this sort of hyper-detailed world building, found it really interesting. I really liked those chapters. Of course, though, I felt bad for the space whales. It was an interest that was also fueled with a kind of sense of like, I shouldn't enjoy this. Also, they're not real whales, but still. This book also has an interesting kind of economic religious aspect that pokes fun at religions today that have grown rich off donations, because this book has created this entire Christian sect called the Church of Prosperity that is entirely based off the accumulation of wealth. Like how wealthy you are is how good you are, how much you donate. You can donate money to the church and then you'll receive like blessings or like exoneration that way. It's wild. This was not only as hilarious as it was poignant, but it explains a lot about Ai's personality, self-worth issues, and motives. Ai is a complex character. She's also a huge weirdo. She's self-deprecating to the core, but more in retrospect, as this is supposed to be like a memoir. She sees sex as escapism, refuses deeper connection, and she's struggling for purpose, yet also is disconnected from her body due to being owned by a pharmaceutical company. Much like how actual slavery was addressed in Moby-Dick, capitalism and corporations controlling everyone is a major undercurrent in Hell's Heart, and I thought it was really well done. Granted, I can be hard to like or feel sorry for. I can totally understand reviewers that did not like her, but I thought she was hilarious most of the time. There's actually a lot about this book that's very funny, but the one thing that didn't land for me were the sperm jokes. Sperm is funny when you're 12. Like, all the other humorous stuff I thought was funny. Like, there are some other sex jokes. There's a lot of like kind of like raunchy humor in it sometimes. Most of that worked for me, but I'm just like, who cares? Like, sperm, who cares? The book is also super horny, which I have no problem with. I've never had a problem with that. I've said this about other books, but this book and Spread Me would get along very well. The side characters were fun. It was clear who they were based off in Moby Dick, but they also had their own personalities, especially Q. The fact that she spoke Latin was so fun. I loved the world building about how Earth was abandoned. Humanity had been in space for so long. They'd forgotten like all of Earth's history and sort of reverted to like a past social state, at least economically and religious wise, of kind of like the 1850s. Like the way that everyone, like the way, so at that time period, people were still like very religious, kind of like people are religious now, but you know what I mean? Like this, it's more of like a thing that people talk about all the time. And it was a bigger part of people's lives. And so what's interesting is that at the time, there were a lot of kind of different sects of kind of Christianity that Moby Dick specifically focuses on, like Quakerism and all this stuff, like Calvinism, all this stuff. And so what Hell's Heart does that I thought was so cool is the fact that it created all these other little sects as well. And so the same kind of dynamics that happen in Moby Dick happen in Hell's Heart with religions, but these religions are kind of just really weird offsets of Christianity. Like there's a death cult, there's all of this stuff. And I just thought, because, you know, my main focus in university and when I studied literature was, you know, Victorian mid-century. And so I have a lot of knowledge of that time period. And so I was like, this is great. I love how it wasn't just like the story of Moby Dick that is like brought into it. It's like all of the themes and all of the kind of the way society even was set out in a certain sense. And I just thought that was incredibly clever. The narrator of the audiobook actually did a great job with the voices. I had a major book crush on the character that is, it's funny, I'm blanking on their name. Based on Starbuck from Moby Dick, the kind of like rigid, uptight, non-binary first mate. It wasn't non-binary in Moby Dick, but non-binary in Hell's Heart. And who was like the only voice of reason, yet also kind of slowly gets corrupted by the captain's charisma. I loved that character. I just loved them. I was like, oh. Overall, this is a book that made me giddy with the joy of adaptation and illusion. I took another course in university called Shakespearean Adaptations, where we read all these bonkers things that seem barely related to the source material. Like Lorca's The Public is actually, it has a lot of themes from Romeo and Juliet. Other stuff that we watched, like Throne of Blood, which is a very obvious Macbeth, retelling, but, like stuff like that. But that class really made me love the idea of adaptations. And it's why I really like when shows and movies take new spins on books, when they adapt them and not just make the book in video form. Like, use the source materials, but use the new media, like, to make it something new. I don't want to just watch the characters acting it out. Like, that's why I really liked all these different adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, because I'm like, I want to see the differences. I want to see how a person, like, I love both versions of Little Women, like the one from the 90s with Winona Ryder and the one from, the Greta Gerwig one. I love them both for different reasons. And that's what I loved about this book. I loved that it took the source material, it took it very faithfully, but it also made it completely its own story. I'm definitely going to buy a paperback version. I really enjoyed it. And because I'm a dork, I wanted to share. So when I did, because I read this for school, I made notes on important passages that I had to come back to for essays and stuff. But then I also circled quotes quotes that I just liked for my own self. And I'm going to read you one from Moby Dick because I like it. And, nope, not that one. You recognize me flipping through this if you watch my classic sci-fi book reviews. Okay, so here's a quote from Moby-Dick that I really like. A noble craft, but somehow a most melancholy. All noble things are touched with that. So if you like that line, read Moby-Dick, and then read Hell's Heart, and then let me know if you share my opinion of really liking both these books. So thank you so much to nobody. I purchased this book. Oh my god, that's rare. Thanks.